Team of Teams, New Rules of Engagement for a Complex World, by General Stanley McChrystal. Introduction. September 30, 2004. The sun is just beginning to bake the sand-colored streets of Baghdad. A few men, dressed to blend in, shuffle into an unremarkable house. Inside, it's a nerve center. Maps on the walls, weapons stacked in the corner. This isn't the U.S. military. This is Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They are preparing for one of their biggest operations. The plan is simple and devastatingly cruel. They will be driving 3 cars, ordinary sedans, packed with propane tanks and ball bearings. Their targets are not soldiers. Their targets are families. A short drive away, a crowd has gathered to celebrate the grand opening of a new sewage plant. It's a small sign of progress, of hope, in a city torn apart by war. There are politicians giving speeches, but mostly, there are children. Laughing, playing, chasing each other around the edges of the crowd. The first car, a Hyundai, doesn't slow down. It plows full speed into the group of children. The driver mutters a prayer before pressing a button. In the fraction of a second it takes for the signal to travel from his hand to the trunk, the street becomes a mosaic of fire, shrapnel, and blood. Mothers scream, searching frantically for their sons and daughters. American soldiers, stationed just down the block, sprint to the scene. They try to set up a perimeter, to help the wounded, to make sense of the chaos. And that's when the second car, a Volkswagen, arrives. It speeds directly into the pack of soldiers and the terrified children who had emerged from the smoke, and detonates its own payload. 35 children now lay dead. This was the enemy the United States faced in Iraq. And on paper, the fight should have been no contest. The American-led task force was the most advanced, best equipped, and most lethal fighting force in human history. They were, in their own words, the best of the best. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, by contrast, was a scattered collection of under-resourced extremists. And yet, in 2004, the best of the best were losing. They were losing not because they weren't strong enough, or smart enough, or disciplined enough. They were losing because the very rulebook they had mastered was obsolete. The world had changed under their feet, and they hadn't realized it yet. This is the story of how they woke up. It's the story of how a legendary military commander, General Stanley McChrystal, had to tear down a century of conventional wisdom and rebuild his organization from the inside out, in the middle of a brutal war. The book we're exploring today, Team of Teams, is his account of that transformation. It has become a modern classic, a guide for leaders not just in the military, but in boardrooms, hospitals, and startups all across the globe. Because the problem General McChrystal faced in the streets of Iraq is the same problem we all face today, in a world that has become faster, more connected, and profoundly less predictable than ever before. So, what is the secret to thriving in chaos? What are the new rules of engagement for a complex world? By the end of our time together, you'll understand the hidden architecture of today's most successful teams. You'll see why the old models of leadership are failing, and what must rise up to take their place. This isn't just a war story. It's a blueprint for the future of how we work, lead, and win. Book summary. To understand the revolution that General McChrystal ignited, we first have to understand the machine he inherited. The U.S. military, and especially its elite special operations units, was the magnificent end product of 100 years of management science. It was an organization built for one purpose above all others: efficiency. Think about it like this. For as long as there have been armies, commanders have tried to turn the chaos of battle into something predictable. From the Roman legions, who built their camps in the exact same layout no matter where they were in the world, to the relentless drills of Frederick the Great, the goal has always been to create interchangeable parts in a great military machine. This idea reached its absolute peak in the 20th century, thanks to a man who never wore a uniform. His name was Frederick Winslow Taylor. In the early 1900s, Taylor was a man obsessed. He walked around his town trying to find the single most efficient way to take a step. He was a habitual optimizer. And when he stepped onto the factory floor of a steel company, he saw a world of inefficiency. Workers had their own quirky, rule-of-thumb methods for doing things. Knowledge was passed down like folklore. Taylor believed there had to be one best way to do everything. Armed with a stopwatch and a ledger, he began to study every single motion. He broke down every task into its smallest possible components, timed them, tweaked them, and reassembled them into a perfectly optimized process. He created instruction cards that told workers exactly what to do, down to the second. The result was miraculous. At Bethlehem Steel, his system allowed machinists to cut 50 feet of steel per minute, when the norm was only 9. He wasn't using new machines. He was using a new system for managing human beings. He called it scientific management. This philosophy spread like wildfire. It created the assembly line, where Henry Ford could build a car in 93 minutes instead of 12 hours. It powered America's arsenal of democracy in World War II, churning out ships and planes at a scale that stunned the world. And it created a new kind of leader, the master planner, the chess player. The leader's job was to be the all-knowing brain at the top of the pyramid. They would do the thinking. The workers, the soldiers on the ground, would do the executing. Information flowed up, and commands flowed down. Each person only needed to know their small piece of the puzzle. This separation of thinking and doing was the very soul of efficiency. This was the model that built the modern world. And it was the model that built the Joint Special Operations Task Force that General McChrystal commanded. He called it an awesome machine. It was an assembly line for counterterrorism. Every operation was meticulously planned, every team was exquisitely specialized, and every action was executed with brutal precision. When the task force was created in the wake of the failed hostage rescue in Iran in 1980, a disaster caused by different military branches failing to coordinate, the solution was pure Taylorism. They created a new layer of management, a new team of master planners at the top, to ensure that everything clicked together perfectly. And against a 20th century enemy, it worked beautifully. But in Iraq, they weren't fighting a 20th century enemy. They were fighting Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI. When McChrystal's team started diagramming AQI's structure on their whiteboards, they didn't see a pyramid. They didn't see an org chart with neat boxes and clear lines of authority. What they saw looked like a tangled mess. A web. A network. AQI had no central headquarters. It had no uniforms. Its leaders were ghosts who could vanish into a crowded city in minutes. It was decentralized, fluid, and shockingly resilient. When the task force took out a high-ranking leader, what should have been a devastating blow, the network just adapted. As one analyst famously put it, we killed about 20 of Al-Qaeda's number 3s over the past decade, but everyone in a network is number 3. This enemy was what the ancient Greeks would have called a polymorph, a shapeshifter. Like the mythical sea god Proteus, who could change his form at will to escape capture, AQI was constantly morphing. In one city, they would act like a traditional tribal council. In another, they were a sophisticated urban terror cell. They were, in a word, adaptable. And the task force, for all its awesome power, was not. The task force was like the magnificent Maginot Line that France built after World War I. It was a marvel of engineering, an impenetrable fortress designed to perfectly fight the last war. But when the Germans came in 1940, they didn't attack the line. They just went around it, with fast-moving tanks and airplanes. The world had changed, and the fortress had become a monument to obsolescence. McChrystal's awesome machine was a managerial Maginot Line. It was perfectly designed for a world that no longer existed. He realized his organization's greatest strength, its ruthless efficiency, had become its greatest weakness. So, why had the world changed so much, and what did it mean for how we lead and organize? The answer lies in understanding the difference between two words we often use interchangeably: complicated and complex. A jet engine is complicated. It has thousands of parts, but they all fit together in a logical, predictable way. An expert can take it apart and put it back together. If one part breaks, you can diagnose the problem and fix it. The relationships are linear. A rainforest, on the other hand, is complex. It's a web of millions of interacting elements: insects, animals, weather patterns, soil bacteria. You cannot predict exactly what will happen if you introduce a new species or cut down a section of trees. A tiny change, like the flapping of a butterfly's wings, could trigger a chain reaction that leads to a hurricane on the other side of the world. The relationships are nonlinear and unpredictable. For a century, our organizations were built to solve complicated problems. Frederick Taylor's factory was a complicated system. But thanks to technology, globalization, and the speed of information, our world has become a complex system. Think about it. 100 years ago, a local protest was a local event. Today, a single person with a smartphone can broadcast a protest to millions around the globe in an instant, potentially sparking a movement that topples governments, as we saw with the Arab Spring. The number of connections and the speed of those connections have exploded. We've gone from a world of neat, linear assembly lines to a world that looks more like that chaotic, interconnected rainforest. In this new world, you can't predict everything. You can't plan for every contingency. A rigid, top-down command and control system is just too slow and too stupid to keep up. This was the profound insight McChrystal and his team came to. They were failing not because they were doing things wrong, but because they were trying to solve a complex problem with a complicated solution. They realized efficiency was no longer enough. The new holy grail had to be adaptability. And if they wanted to become adaptable, they couldn't look to the org charts of the past. They had to look at the one part of their own organization that already embodied this quality: their small, elite teams. What is it that makes a Navy SEAL team, for example, so incredibly effective? It isn't just that they are all super soldiers. The real magic isn't in the individuals, it's in the connections between them. Consider the rescue of Captain Richard Phillips from Somali pirates in 2009. 3 SEAL snipers, on the rocking fantail of a Navy destroyer, at night, 75 feet away, had to simultaneously take out 3 pirates holding the captain hostage on a small, bobbing lifeboat. They had only a split-second opportunity. There was no time to ask for permission. They had to think and act as one single organism. And they did. 3 shots, 3 kills, 1 rescued captain. That level of coordinated, adaptive action doesn't come from a rulebook. It's forged. It's forged in the brutal crucible of Bud/S, the SEAL's infamous 6-month training program in Coronado, California. People think Bud/S is about weeding out the physically weak. But the instructors will tell you that's not true. Most of the people who quit are physically capable. They quit because they lack the right mindset. They're in it for themselves, not for the team. From day one, Bud/S is designed to destroy the idea of individual performance. You are assigned a swim buddy, and you are never to go anywhere without him. You're put into boat crews, and if one person doesn't pull their weight, the entire boat flips over and everyone suffers. The training is designed to be impossible to survive alone. Through this shared hardship, 2 critical things are built. The first is trust. Not just believing someone is a good person, but a deep, intimate, predictive understanding of how they will act under pressure. You learn their strengths, their weaknesses, their tells. This is the dense connectivity that allows a team to move and react without verbal commands. The second is a shared sense of purpose. Every SEAL understands not just their immediate task, but the larger strategic goal of the mission. They see the whole chessboard. This shared context is what allows them to improvise, to make the right call when the plan inevitably falls apart. Trust and purpose. These are the two ingredients that create the oneness of an elite team. This is the very opposite of a traditional command structure. A command is built on vertical relationships, you and your boss. A team is built on horizontal relationships, you and your teammates. We see this difference play out in other high-stakes environments. For decades, airline cockpits were run as commands. The captain was the heroic, all-knowing leader. But as planes became more technologically sophisticated, more complex, this model started to fail. In 1978, United Flight 173 crashed near Portland, Oregon, running out of fuel while the crew was fixated on a minor landing gear problem. The co-pilot and flight engineer tried to warn the captain about the fuel, but in the rigid hierarchy of the cockpit, their warnings were too subtle, and the captain wasn't listening. He was so focused on one part of the problem that he lost sight of the whole system. 10 people died. Contrast that with U.S. Airways Flight 1549, the Miracle on the Hudson. In 2009, Captain Sullenberger's plane lost both engines after a bird strike just minutes after takeoff. There was no checklist for this. No procedure. But the crew, trained in a new philosophy called crew resource management, functioned as a team. They communicated, collaborated, and improvised a solution in under 4 minutes, saving everyone on board. The aviation industry had learned the hard way that in a complex environment, you need a team, not a command. This was the breakthrough for General McChrystal. He had an organization full of the best small teams in the world: SEALs, Rangers, Army Special Forces. But the organization as a whole was a command. It was what he calls a command of teams. The teams themselves were fluid and adaptable, but they were trapped inside rigid silos. The SEALs didn't trust the Army guys. The operators on the ground didn't trust the intelligence analysts back at headquarters. Information didn't flow between the teams. There were blinks in the system, gaps where collaboration broke down. He saw this firsthand when he found a supply closet at the Baghdad airport stuffed with unopened bags of intelligence gathered from raids. The operators on the ground would grab laptops and cell phones, throw them in a bag, and toss them on a helicopter. By the time the analysts got to it, the information was stale and useless. The operators saw the analysts as slow and irrelevant. The analysts saw the operators as arrogant door kickers. They were on the same side, but they weren't on the same team. They were all playing the prisoner's dilemma. In this classic game theory experiment, 2 prisoners are interrogated separately. If both stay silent, they each get a small sentence. If one rats out the rat goes free and the other gets a long sentence. If they both rat each other out, they both get a medium sentence. From a purely self-interested perspective, the best move is always to betray your partner. But if both do that, they end up with a worse outcome than if they had just trusted each other and cooperated. This was the task force. Each team, acting in its own self-interest, hoarding information, competing for resources, was making the entire organization weaker. McChrystal realized he couldn't just make one giant team of thousands of people. The magic of a small team comes from its size, from that intimate, personal trust. But what if he could get the teams to trust each other the way individuals on a team do? What if he could scale the oneness? This was the birth of the team of teams concept. The goal wasn't for every individual to know every other individual. The goal was for every team to feel a bond of trust and shared purpose with every other team. The connections had to become horizontal, crisscrossing the entire organization, just like the network structure of their enemy. But how do you actually do that? How do you build trust and purpose across an organization of thousands, scattered across continents, made up of different cultures? This led to the two core pillars of McChrystal's revolution. The first pillar was shared consciousness. He had to create a collective brain, a single, holistic understanding of the entire war that was shared by everyone, from the generals in Washington to the youngest private on the ground in Iraq. He started by redesigning their physical space. At their new headquarters at Balad Air Base, they gutted a massive aircraft bunker and built a single, open-plan Joint Operations Center, or JOC. No cubicles, no private offices. Intelligence analysts sat next to operators. CIA agents sat next to Army Rangers. A giant wall of screens at the front showed live video feeds from operations, real-time intelligence updates, and maps of the entire theater. Anyone could look up and see the whole system, at any time. They called it the Star Wars Bar because it was filled with a motley crew from every corner of the security universe. This was the exact opposite of the traditional, need-to-know culture of the military. But the physical space was just the beginning. The true heart of shared consciousness was a daily meeting. It was called the Owandi, for operations and intelligence. Every single day, for 2 hours, McChrystal would host a secure video teleconference. But this wasn't just for a few senior commanders. Using new technology, they piped this meeting out to everyone. Eventually, 7,000 people a day were dialing in. It was part battlefield update, part Socratic dialogue. A young analyst in a remote outpost could brief the commanding general directly, and then a SEAL team leader in another part of the country could jump in with a question. They talked through problems in real time, for everyone to see. McChrystal, the 4-star general, made himself vulnerable. He would think out loud, admitting when he didn't know something and asking for advice. This modeled the culture he wanted, one of humility, transparency, and collaboration. The Owandi became the daily ritual that wove the network together, pumping information and context through the veins of the entire organization. The second pillar was building the human relationships to make that information flow meaningful. To beat the prisoner's dilemma, they needed more than just a shared screen. They needed real trust. So they started a radical embedding program. They would take a world-class Navy SEAL and send him to live and work with an Army Special Forces team for 6 months. Or they would take a battle-hardened operator and put him in a suit and send him to an embassy as a liaison officer. The initial resistance was intense. These were tribal cultures that had been rivals for decades. But slowly, it worked. The SEAL would see the strengths of the Army's discipline. The Army team would see the value in the SEAL's creative thinking. They built personal relationships. A face-to-face bond. And that trust extended from the individual to the entire unit. Suddenly, the other guys didn't suck so much anymore. This combination, the extreme transparency of the Owandi and the deep, personal trust built through the embedding program, created shared consciousness. It was the organizational equivalent of every player on a sports team knowing the whole playbook and trusting their teammates to be in the right position. But shared consciousness on its own is not enough. Imagine a soccer team where every player sees the perfect pass, but has to get permission from the coach before they can kick the ball. They would be paralyzed. This led to the second, and perhaps even more radical pillar of the transformation, empowered execution. This meant decentralizing decision-making authority. It meant pushing power out to the edges of the organization. For centuries, leadership has followed what McChrystal calls the Perry Principle. In the 1850s, Commodore Matthew Perry sailed to Japan with the authority to act as an ambassador, a trade commissioner, and a commander-in-chief. Why? Because it would take months for a message to get back to Washington. The president couldn't see what was happening, so he had to trust Perry to make the call. But as technology improved, the telegraph, the radio, and now the internet, leaders could see more. And the more they could see, the more they wanted to control. The temptation to micromanage became overwhelming. McChrystal had more visibility into his operations than any commander in history. He could watch raids in real time on a screen in his headquarters. He could, if he wanted to, be the ultimate chess master, directing every move. But he realized this was a trap. The speed of the modern battlefield was too fast for one person's brain. By the time a decision made its way up the chain of command to him, and his approval made its way back down, the opportunity was gone. He needed to reverse the Perry principle. He needed to create a culture of eyes on, hands off. His job was not to make every decision. His job was to provide his teams with the shared consciousness, the context and the trust, so that they could make the best decision. He began to delegate decisions that had once been reserved for generals, pushing them down to the colonels, majors, and captains on the ground. He told them, as long as it is not immoral or illegal, if it supports our effort, do it. This transformed the role of the leader. The leader was no longer the heroic chess master. The leader had to become a gardener. A chess master controls every move. A gardener doesn't grow plants. A gardener creates the environment, the soil, the water, the sunlight, in which the plants can grow themselves. McChrystal's job was to tend the ecosystem. He had to nurture the culture of trust and transparency. He had to prune the bureaucracy that choked communication. He had to make sure the network was healthy, so that the teams within it could flourish and adapt on their own. This combination of shared consciousness and empowered execution was the magic formula. It created a team of teams. And the results were staggering. Before the transformation, the task force was conducting about 18 raids a month. By 2006, they were conducting 300 raids a month, a 17-fold increase in operational tempo, with almost no increase in resources. And they were getting smarter. They were learning and adapting faster than the enemy. This new, networked organism was finally put to the ultimate test in the hunt for Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the brutal leader of AQI. The final chase was a masterpiece of the team of teams in action. It began with an intelligent sergeant major, acting on his own intuition, noticing suspicious activity at a farmhouse. This led to a raid, which led to the capture of a key figure, who eventually gave up the name of Zarqawi's spiritual advisor. Then, the entire global network focused on finding this one man. For 17 days, they maintained round-the-clock surveillance, a feat that required pooling ISR assets, like predator drones, that had once been sources of intense competition. But now, with a shared purpose, the teams collaborated seamlessly. They followed the advisor through a series of vehicle swaps designed to shake a tail, until he finally led them to a house in a small village. A man in black robes came out to greet him. It was Zarqawi. The raid force that was supposed to capture him was delayed. The clock was ticking. The local commander on the ground didn't wait for permission from McChrystal. He didn't need to. He had the context. He had the authority. He made the call to use the backup plan, an airstrike from 2 F-16s. On June 7, 2006, the house disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Zarqawi was dead. But the work wasn't over. In the hours that followed, the task force launched a wave of coordinated follow-on raids across Iraq, hitting targets they had identified during the chase, crippling the AQI network before it had time to react. The organization that had been outmaneuvered and humiliated in 2004 had transformed itself. To defeat a network, they had become a network. They had become a team of teams. And they were finally winning. Commentary. The story of General McChrystal's task force is more than just a military history lesson. It's a parable for our times. It reveals a fundamental shift in the way the world works, and a corresponding need for a new way of leading. The central idea, the one that I hope stays with you, is this: the pursuit of pure efficiency, which was the driving force of the 20th century, is now a dangerously outdated strategy. In a complex world, adaptability is the new currency. The organizations that thrive will be the ones that can learn and respond the fastest. Think about that computer simulation of a future traffic intersection without any stop signs or traffic lights. It looks like absolute chaos. Cars are zipping through from all directions, missing each other by inches. Our 20th century brain, our mental model, screams that this is wrong. It's unsafe. It's inefficient. But it's actually the opposite. Because every car is communicating with every other car in real time, because they have shared consciousness, they can move through the intersection faster and with far fewer accidents. It's an organic, adaptive system. It's a team of teams. This is the kind of thinking we need to embrace. We are often trapped by the mental models of the past, the neat, tidy org charts, and the belief in the heroic, all-knowing leader. But as GM discovered with its tragic ignition switch failure, those rigid silos can become death traps. Information gets stuck. People don't talk to each other. No one sees the whole picture. And disaster follows. Ford, under Alan Mulally, took the opposite approach. He broke down the silos, forced collaboration, and created his One Ford culture. He became a gardener. And while GM was going bankrupt, Ford was turning a profit. So how can you start applying these ideas, right now, in your own life? You don't need to be a general or a CEO. This starts with small, deliberate actions. First, practice seeing the whole system. Whatever team or group you're a part of, a sports team, a school project, a part-time job, don't just focus on your individual task. Ask questions. Understand how your piece fits into the larger mission. Why does this matter? What is the ultimate goal we are all trying to achieve? Developing this contextual awareness is the first step toward shared consciousness. Second, practice radical transparency. The old instinct is to hoard information, to believe that knowledge is power. The new rule is that shared knowledge is power. The next time you send an email or a text about a group project, ask yourself, who else needs to know this? Who else could benefit from this context? Add one more person to the conversation. Default to sharing. And third, build a bridge. The real magic of a team of teams happens when trust is built between different groups. So, find someone from another team, a different club at school, a different department at your job, even just a different group of friends, and intentionally build a relationship. Take them out for coffee. Ask them what they're working on, what their challenges are. Be the liaison officer. You'll be amazed at the new perspectives and opportunities that open up when you break out of your own silo. These actions might feel small, even inefficient. But they are the seeds from which a truly adaptive, resilient, and powerful team of teams can grow. That was a summary of Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. We've certainly covered the main ideas today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary like this is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the major cities and the rivers, but it can't give you the feeling of the sun on your skin, or the smell of the local food, or the sound of the language. The real magic happens when you visit the country yourself. If any of the stories or ideas we talked about today resonated with you, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy of the book. Reading it isn't just about learning a new management theory. It's an experience that can fundamentally change the way you see leadership, teamwork, and the world around you. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, and you want to continue exploring the ideas that have shaped the world's most successful people, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It helps us reach more curious minds like yours. Let's keep learning and growing together.